The village of Thaxted, nestled deep in the Essex countryside, is the very picture of English tranquility. With its medieval guildhall, historic church, and quiet, winding streets, it's a place that seems a world away from the violence and chaos of modern life. Here, St. Patrick's Day is usually a cause for quiet celebration, a time for neighbours to gather over a pint and share in the good cheer. But on March 17, 2024, the festive atmosphere in a local pub curdled into something dark and unrecognisable. The cheerful sounds of celebration became the grim opening act for a shockingly brutal crime. This is the story of how a run-of-the-mill pub argument, the kind that happens in 1,000 pubs every weekend and is forgotten by morning, didn't just end with a few angry words. It ended with a calculated, cold-blooded murder. It's a case that serves as a chilling examination of how a verbal threat, so often brushed off as just talk, can become a terrifying, deadly promise, and how a series of small, deliberate choices can lead a man to hunt another down and extinguish his life in the one place he should have been safest. On the festive evening of March 17, 2024, two men argued in a pub. One of them, 52-year-old Richard Langley, made the sensible choice and walked away, choosing peace over pride. He left the confrontation behind and made the short, 5-minute journey back to the quiet of his own home. But for the other man, 51-year-old Kevin Horswill, the argument was far from over. Driven by a rage that refused to cool, he decided he was going to have the last word. Hours later, Richard Langley was found dead, strangled with his own clothes in the sanctuary of his back garden. The man who had walked away was ambushed and killed, all because his killer couldn't let it go. The pub and the spark. The evening of March 17, 2024, began with the familiar buzz of a holiday celebration at the Star Pub in Mill End, Thaxted. It was St. Patrick's Day, and the mood was light. Pints were being poured, and the sound of laughter filled the air. Among the patrons enjoying the evening were Richard Langley, a 52-year-old local, and Kevin Horswill, aged 51, who was at the pub with his partner. For a time, it was just another night. But under the surface of the festivities, a conflict was brewing that would shatter the peace of the entire village. What exactly kicked off the argument remains murky. These disputes, fueled by alcohol and heightened emotions, often begin over next to nothing. Initial reports and court testimony would later suggest the flashpoint was a clash between Richard Langley and Horswill's partner. Whatever the specific cause, the disagreement between Langley and Horswill escalated with shocking speed. A minor friction point erupted into a full-blown confrontation, the jovial pub atmosphere turning tense and hostile around them. The argument grew so heated that, as witnesses would later recount in court, Horswill's anger boiled over into a direct, chilling threat. He locked eyes with Langley and snarled the words, "You're a ******ing dead man." In the heat of a pub row, such words might be heard and dismissed, chalked up to drunken bravado and forgotten by the time the sun came up. But for Kevin Horswill, this was no empty threat. This wasn't just an angry outburst fueled by the moment, it was a promise he intended to keep. Sensing the situation was spiraling dangerously out of control, Richard Langley made what seemed to be the wisest possible choice. He disengaged. He left the argument, walked out of the Star, and chose to de-escalate the conflict rather than feed the flames of Horswill's fury. Village CCTV cameras captured his departure and his quiet walk home. The footage showed a perfectly ordinary scene, a man walking his dog, carrying a box of Coca-Cola he'd just bought, making the 5-minute trip back to his house on Orchard Close. It was a normal end to a night that had taken an unpleasant turn. The immediate danger seemed to have passed. Langley had walked away, and in any reasonable world, that should have been the end of it. But the rage that had ignited in Kevin Horswill at the pub did not fade with Langley's absence. While Richard was settling back into the quiet and safety of his home, Horswill was making a different set of choices. He and his partner also left the pub, but somewhere along their route home, his path diverged. Driven by what Judge Mary Loram would later describe as a deliberate and conscious decision, Horswill turned back. Consumed by a need to confront him and vent your anger, he began following the exact same route Richard Langley had taken just minutes earlier. The same village CCTV that had captured Langley's peaceful walk home now showed a far more sinister journey. Horswill, a shadow moving through the quiet streets, methodically tracking the man he had threatened, like a predator hunting its prey. The choice to turn back was the moment a pub dispute became a premeditated hunt. The attack in the garden. Just after the stroke of midnight, in the first few minutes of March 18th, Richard Langley was in his back garden. This private space, an extension of his home and a place of sanctuary, was where Kevin Horswill found him. The shouting from the pub was over. There were no more verbal threats to alert the neighbors. Instead, there was only a sudden, brutal, and chillingly determined attack. Horswill, his rage having festered on the walk over, ambushed Langley. In an act of shocking intimacy and brutality, he twisted Langley's own shirt around his neck and strangled him. The violence was swift and merciless. The pathologist's report would later paint a stark and devastating picture of Richard Langley's final moments. He had been strangled to death, and the bruising on his arms clearly suggested he had tried in vain to shield himself from the ferocious, unexpected assault. The attack was so sudden and vicious that his attempts to defend himself were futile. A neighbor, whose attention was caught by the disturbing sounds of a struggle, managed to capture an audio recording of the attack. That recording, a chilling testament to the horror of that night, would later serve in court as an acoustic witness to the last moments of Richard Langley's life. The grim discovery was made at approximately 12:35 a.m. by Richard's wife, Maureen. Having returned from a game of bingo earlier in the evening, she had seen her husband come home and thought the night was winding down. Now, going to let the cat out, she stepped into the garden and found her husband lying unresponsive on the ground. In a heartbreaking police interview later played for the court, she described her desperate pleas, her voice cracking as she recounted shouting, please wake up, that his still form. Alerted by the commotion, neighbors rushed to help, performing CPR in a frantic attempt to save him, but it was too late. When paramedics arrived, Richard Langley was pronounced dead at the scene. While a family and a neighborhood were just beginning to grapple with the shock and horror, the police investigation was already moving quickly. About 45 minutes before Langley's body was discovered, a call had been made to authorities regarding an assault in the village where a man had suffered serious head injuries. That man was Kevin Horswill. With the two incidents occurring so close in time and proximity, Essex police rapidly connected the dots. A murder investigation was launched, and it didn't take long for them to piece together the timeline of events, from the pub argument to the fatal encounter in the garden. Kevin Horswill was arrested at his address in the early hours of March 18th and, after receiving hospital treatment for his injuries, he was taken into custody and charged with the murder of Richard Langley. The trial and the verdict. The case against Kevin Horswill for the murder of Richard Langley opened at Chelmsford Crown Court in January 2025. Over the course of a 2-week trial, the prosecution methodically laid out a clear, damning, and heartbreaking narrative. This was not a spontaneous brawl that got out of hand. This was a calculated act of revenge, born from a trivial pub argument and nurtured into a murderous rage. The weight of the evidence presented to the jury was overwhelming. They were shown the haunting CCTV footage that served as a silent narrator of the night's events. First, the clips of Richard Langley walking home peacefully, his dog by his side, looking to escape the conflict. Then, the chilling footage from minutes later, showing Kevin Horswill deliberately taking the same route, his intent clear. The jury also heard the harrowing audio of the struggle, captured by a neighbor, which provided a terrifying, real-time account of Richard's final moments. This was followed by the devastating testimony from Richard's wife, Maureen, who recounted the horror of finding her husband's body in the place he should have been safest. The forensic evidence was just as conclusive. A pathologist, Dr. Virginia Fitzpatrick-Swallow, testified about the pinprick dots of blood on Langley's body, explaining they were the result of a massive buildup of pressure from strangulation. She also detailed the bruising on his arms, concluding they were most likely defensive wounds, evidence that he had tried to shield himself from his attacker. Faced with this mountain of evidence, Horswill's defense team attempted to construct an alternate reality. They argued that he had acted in self-defense, claiming that he was not the instigator of the final, deadly confrontation. At one point, Horswill even claimed that he was merely giving Langley a bear hug to restrain him. But this narrative crumbled under the slightest scrutiny. The prosecution relentlessly dismantled the self-defense claim, pointing out that Horswill had every opportunity to walk away. He had left the pub. He was on his way home. The decision to turn back and go to Richard Langley's house was his and his alone. After hearing all the evidence and testimony, the jury was sent to deliberate. They remained out for just over 6 hours before reaching a conclusion. As the foreman of the jury prepared to deliver the verdict, a single, telling crack appeared in Kevin Horswill's stoic demeanor. His left hand began to shake uncontrollably. The verdict was read, guilty of the murder of Richard Langley. This case is a terrifying reminder of how a fleeting moment of anger, if not released, can fester and grow into something monstrous. It raises profound questions about choice, responsibility, and the hidden pressures in our communities. Let me know in the comments, what part of this story stays with you the most? The sentencing and the aftermath. On January 29, 2025, Kevin Horswill stood before Her Honour Judge Mary Loram at Chelmsford Crown Court to learn his fate. As the judge delivered her sentencing, Horswill reportedly showed no emotion, his face a stoic mask even as the full weight of his crime was laid bare. Judge Loram's words were incisive and left no room for ambiguity. She systematically dismantled any notion that this was a crime of passion or a heat-of-the-moment explosion of violence. Speaking directly to Horswill, she laid out the sequence of his choices. Following the argument, you left after him and had the option to just go home. The threat to you was gone. But while walking home you turned back and went to Mr. Langley's. She powerfully underscored the element of premeditation. You followed him home to confront him and vent your anger. Violence was inevitable. This was not an explosion of violence in the heat of the moment, you chose to do that. Her words painted a chilling picture of a predator, not a man who had lost control. She described the attack as a determined assault to a man you had taken by surprise. The judge's condemnation continued, touching upon the coldness of Horswill's actions after the murder. I am satisfied that you left Mr. Langley dying, and that you left his wife to find him. Her final words drove home the terrible sincerity of the threat made hours earlier in the pub. I believe you meant every word of every threat that Mr. Langley was a dead man. Kevin Horswill was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 18 years before he would be eligible for parole. For Richard Langley's family, the verdict was a form of legal justice, but it offered no antidote to their profound grief. A victim impact statement from his wife, Maureen, conveyed the unending devastation. In it, she expressed that she wants to go crawl in a corner and never come out. Her words captured the life sentence of sorrow that Horswill had imposed on her and her family. The judge acknowledged this deep and lasting pain, noting the void that had been left in the lives of the victim's family. Detective Superintendent Ant Alcock of the Essex Police, who led the investigation, summarized the outcome poignantly. Today was about securing justice for Richard Langley. My thoughts and condolences remain with Richard's loved ones. He acknowledged that while the legal process had concluded, the family's suffering would endure. The murder of Richard Langley is a chilling and deeply modern tragedy. It began with an utterly trivial pub argument, a fleeting moment of friction that should have been nothing more than an unpleasant memory. But in the mind of one man, that spark of anger was not extinguished. It was nurtured, fed, and allowed to fester into a murderous rage. Richard Langley did everything right. He recognized the danger, he de-escalated the situation, and he walked away. He went back to the safety and sanctity of his home. But he was followed by a man who refused to let the argument go, a man who made a series of conscious choices to turn a moment of anger into a final, fatal act of vengeance. A quiet village street, a symbol of peace and community, became a crime scene. A loving family was shattered. All because of a senseless fight that should have been forgotten by the next morning, but instead became a brutal and unforgettable testament to the destructive power of a single, unforgiving choice.